Well, thanks for showing up, everybody. It's great to see faces and boxes again. Um, so we do something about intellectual integrity basically every winter and spring breakout because it's always a good subject to talk about with people and to let people know that we take these things seriously, that the associate deans are deeply involved in the process, and to try to answer any questions that might come up. And that's particularly the case now because we had a significant revision to the to what we're now calling the academic integrity policy. That for years we called it intellectual integrity policy. Regardless of what you call it, it's cheating, plagiarism, fabrication, copyright violation, all that stuff. The main real differences in the policy are in making some things clear that weren't necessarily clear before about what is or isn't a violation. A little bit to try to give some guidance in terms of how you might go about meting out punishment, penalties for things, and a couple of things related to closing loopholes. For a long time, we like to say that if students had multiple violations, they would have ramifications for that. And realistically, that didn't happen for a long time. There was a perception that there was a double jeopardy problem with that. And in talking with student conduct, Alexis, before his departure, was instrumental in the revision to the policy. And I think that we are in an era now where student conduct is really on board with instructors doing the right thing for academic integrity policing, and trying to make it as straightforward a process as it can be for an instructor. We recognize that this is not easy, that as soon as you identify this, there's that crossroads in the mind where you say, well, if I do what I'm supposed to do, I'm opening myself up for having to do a bunch of work, because it means putting in a report, regardless of how simple that is. It takes time, and it means dealing with a student who might be troublesome when it comes to telling them that you plagiarized and here's the penalty for it. I just hope that, and I think that the associate deans are consistent in this, that we want to support instructors who are doing the right thing, because we know that there are a lot of faculty out there who, instead of taking that road, take the other road, which is, well, rather than report this, I'm just going to talk to the student, tell them that, well, you're going to be in big trouble if you do anything more, but we're going to keep this out of the official system. And in doing that, we create a system where students are held accountable when they plagiarize in your course, in my course, in Chris's course, and Liz's course. So the only way that we can hold students accountable is by knowing that they violate. And I hope that the revision to the policy makes it clear that when students violate multiple times, that there are that there are increased implications for that, especially students who violate in multiple classes at a high level. So a student who uses Chegg in Econ 200 class, and then the next semester in Marketing 250 uses Chegg or cheats or does something else, that's going to trigger some actual consequences. And it's consequences that you as an instructor don't have to worry about. You just have to deal with your case in your class and make sure that the report is in. And we, working with the associate or with the conduct office, will deal with those ramifications. So Magdalena said, I thought that was supposed to be the case before. I thought it was supposed to be the case before as well, but it really wasn't happening. And I think now we're at the point where we know that it will happen, but there's nothing getting in the way of that happening. So I could show you the graphics and give you the numbers, but I will just say that having kept track of the numbers for several semesters now, the pandemic hasn't caused students to be intrinsically less inclined to breaking the rules. And the numbers that we see across the schools and disciplines are really very consistent. Regardless of whether students are being reported, regardless of whether the violations are being reported, we know that students across the college are doing these things. So, yeah, it's in astoundingly consistent proportions, and it's not something that's limited to first-year students. It's not something that's limited to students in one particular discipline. There are some areas that are much better at reporting. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Matt. But it would be great if we could get to a place where everyone, when they see this happen in their class, does the right thing. So, questions? So Magdalena asked about the pause, the academic penalty thing. Chris or Jen, would you like to say something about the pausing the penalty process?
I could try if I understand it correctly. So, I mean, there may be cases where maybe this is an example at the end of a semester. If there's some additional investigation that needs to happen, you suspect an incident, you want to check into it. Grades are due soon. I mean, a change in policy also is discussing incidents with the department chair. I mean, associate deans are always good consultants on this as well, but that was a change in the wording in the policy of involving the chair. And I think some of that was to try to generate maybe a little bit better, in part, a little bit better consistency in how penalties were being enacted. So I don't know with the question if it's like an instructor pause, if that's being referred to, or if it's more like at the conduct office level that we're talking about a pause. So maybe a little bit more information there and we can go down the right road.
I believe in the policy, it says that the instructor should pause academic penalty until the student conduct investigates. And a usual scenario is a student cheats on the exam and should get a 0, and the 0 on the exam will lower their grade, you know, by a letter or something like that. Or so
now I know what part you're talking about, so this will help. So that is conditional on a level 3 violation, I think.
I think cheating on an exam is a level 3 violation.
Yeah, so if the instructor determines that, I mean, if you're classifying it at that level of violation and a grade is going to be given as an E for the course, then there's from what the policy says, there's an automatic elevation to student conduct. And so as soon as you're in student conduct land, it's being reviewed now at that level as well. And so I think that's why it says you should pause the academic penalty process, because there's another office involved. And if you were to assign the penalty and close it off, it can cause issues with what student conduct might act on if there's a pattern of violations or other things going on. So it's.
But I think Magdalena's asking, does she give the E at the grade deadline? Because there's a grade deadline that's pretty darn firm, right? Does she let it be an incomplete? Does she give an E? Does she give the
And-
grade
And it doesn't even have to be an E. It could just be a,
a lower
maybe the
grade,
student,
like
yeah,
a C
yeah.
versus a B? Do you give the lower grade, the higher grade, right? Do you give a grade assuming that, the cheating hadn't happened? Do you give the lower grade because you think you'll prevail? Do you give an incomplete because it's undetermined? I think if you're hitting a grade deadline, a hard deadline, I think you need guidance about how you assign a letter grade.
I think that the answer to this is, and we have the no grade.
Paul, you're not loud enough. I don't know, maybe I can't hear you, but I don't know if other people can hear you. I think you
Yeah.
need to be a little louder.
Your
Move
computer
closer to
mic, your computer mic needs a little love. Needs some
Yeah,
love.
you need to use the force. You need to project your inner Jedi a little more.
I'm using Jen's camera, so it's Jen's fault. Anyway, I think that the answer to the question is unless the instructor gets told, hey, student conduct has issues with this, the instructor should just go through and put in the grade as they determine. And it's basically, you don't have to pause anything unless there's someone who tells you, hey, we need to take a look at this. If we're at December 22nd or whenever the grade deadline is, use the whatever the no grade, there's a new grade possibility in the drop down. So you can use that as the grade is under discussion, basically.
Okay.
But you, as an instructor, you shouldn't have to feel that you're having to think on your own for this. It's something that you should just do as you would normally do, unless someone specifically tells you, whether it's the associate dean or the director of student conduct comes to you and says, hey, can you pause this because we're in the middle of figuring out whether we should expel the student. Other than that circumstance, I would say just review it, assign the penalty, assign the grade, and we're done. And I realize that written the policy is not as clear as it could be on that, unfortunately.
I'll make what is probably an obvious statement. So as we were revising the policy and we were having meetings and we were talking to Alexis and student conduct, it was pretty clear that the system is not working in a way that everyone who needs to be informed gets informed. So in the old system, instructors would submit a form, it would go into sort of this weird hole in the associate provost's office, and associate deans would get notified. One of the things we tried to do is when we cleaned up the policy is to make the communication better between student conduct, between instructors, between associate deans, so that we could better track situations where you've got students that are violating in multiple areas. And so when we include something like, put a pause on it, the spirit of it really is that consultation piece. Just in the, in the event that we've got a student who is violating across multiple courses, multiple schools, whatever it might be. So it can be, I think, on the surface, perceived as extra work from the instructor's point of view. I know we still have a lot of work to do in terms of that form and making the form easier for you as instructors to submit and all of that, and for us to sort of interpret on the other side as well. But I think if we can kind of agree that the spirit of it is, we have a lot of academic integrity violations across campus. Oftentimes they don't get reported. They're certainly underreported. If Alexis told us anything before he left, it was that there is so many academic integrity violations across this campus. It's rampant, and we are not doing enough to curb it. So I think this is a way, and it's going to take us a while to work out the process. We've got the policy, we're still working out the process to make all of this better and help everyone understand what it means when we submit a violation and the benefits of submitting those violations as opposed to just handling it sort of internally. All of that stuff we're still working on it. So I think, it's great to have these kinds of conversations because it helps us. It helps us make a better process moving forward.
What other questions do you have?
And happy news, Chegg is being sued by both publishing companies and its shareholders. So that's nice.
Excellent.
That is awesome news.
It is.
Yes, by the way, I've been getting these emails from Chegg asking me to, yeah, you can make money, upload your course materials, we're gonna pay you this much.
Yep.
So I think faculty should be warned not to do that.
But you're denying us, extra salary for our intellectual property.
Maybe we need to go to the Chegg building with some torches and things like that, right?
Torches and pitchforks, sure. Sure, why not?
Do they have a building nowadays?
I think they are actually located in California. They actually have because when their reports are on Pacific time. So like when they issue a report about questions and an honor code report, you just got to be careful because there's time stamped in the Pacific time zone of when questions were uploaded, things like that. I mean, I think the lawsuit, and Magdalena mentioned that the reach out is that I think Chegg basically expects that publishers might be able to win some respect about whether Chegg can just say, we're answering every question at the end of the book of questions that we didn't write that were actually the property of somebody else and we're posting them. And so I think they're expecting they're going to have to settle and agree not to do that. So they're trying to build a repository from professors with a certain amount of enrollment and a certain amount of demand. And they're probably trying to get their own database that they can argue does belong to them. Chegg also offers this honor lock thing where basically if you upload your exam ahead of time, they will block the upload of any of those questions from the exams for a certain period of time. Unfortunately, it's only like up to 2 hours. So for those of us that open an exam over a 48-hour window for students to take, it doesn't really work anyway. But the idea is that then becomes their property in the future, right? So once you participate, yeah, I know, it's just. But I've been clear with the policy, and I would just, I have a syllabus that explicitly says, if you upload to these sites, if you copy from these sites, I'm probably going to find you, and I'm going to enforce it. And I routinely check after an exam, whether questions before an exam, whether they were out there from prior to make sure the exam is clean, and then after the exam, whether or not these questions have been kind of uploaded as well. This fall semester, I did not have an issue. I didn't find kind of any issues with my specific questions as well.
I think, Liz, you're correct, because I know in the School of Business, some of our younger faculty have been doing it. And I think this might be more an issue of comfort level with technology also, because
and there's this reputational effect. I think, I have a lot of business students, and I do think they talk to each other and say, don't use Chegg in Dr. Schmidt's class because she'll nail you. This other professor doesn't check, which becomes an issue, like you said, about reporting and whether you're even looking for it, right? So, and, there's a lot of backlash, which I'm glad to see against publisher codes, Connect, MyLab, and things like that, because those are, we don't own that content. We can't tell Chegg to take it down. And if you're using publisher provided questions, they are almost certainly answered on that site. I mean, the database is just huge. So anyone who's doing that online, students can get a Chegg subscription and basically get 100% on that part of.
So you can't ask them to take it down, but you can ask them to report the names for cheating, right? Do they still have to do that?
Oh, if you actually find a copy of who uploaded and who used the question, right? So if you used a publisher question from their test bank or from the back of a chapter, and then students answer, and that answer is actually on Chegg. Well, you don't even have to ask. If student copies an answer from Chegg, sort of word for word or tellingly, you can actually, again, if you've designed your syllabus to say you can't use outside sources or outside sources must be cited, then then you already have a case because someone word for word took an answer from another site and passed it off as their own work, right? So they violated the terms, right? But you can't tell them to take down a question that's been written by a Pearson author. I suppose the latest Chegg Honor Codes tells you who uploaded it and who accessed it. Keep in mind, with a publisher content, the uploader is probably not even from SUNY Oswego, right? Because people all over the United States are using this Pearson MyLab product. So it could come from California or Texas or, Vermont or wherever. So. And it's, John and I use the Waymaker package in Principles. We've used an OER solution now for John for several years, me since last year. And, they have a quiz too, and the quiz questions show up on the Waymaker as well. But what I did is I weighted it accordingly. So the quiz just doesn't take up that much weight. So they can decide to check their way through it, but then they're not going to pass the course that way, right? There are other ways and other questions that come in and other activities. So I think, sometimes I guess you have to educate it about it, and unfortunately it's just too easy to use that publisher content, to post it, to not write your own work, to not have to grade your own work. And it just leads to this problem.
I think what I don't know, as a group, in my experience, I've been telling people in the School of Business they have to report, and we are still not reporting. Only, as I said, the younger folks who are following up on Chegg and stuff are going out there, catching it and reporting it. But I think what needs to happen is, I think if there is within departments someone who's pushing for it, I think that's how you can build up momentum, because we are further ahead in the School of Business than where we used to be, not as far as I would like it to be, because people are now starting to report. But I mean, there was a time when they were doing something, but they were not reporting. So that student could have been cheating in another class and we would not know anything about it, because the instructor did something on their own and we didn't find out about it. So the student is running around doing little things here and there. But I think that's how we can bring about a change, because I mean, I already see a little bit, not enough, within the School of Business. And that's just from standing up in front of the meeting, in a faculty meeting and pleading, please report, please report, please report.
Well, it really varies in the arts and sciences. So let's not, I don't really want to pick on the School of Business about this, because I have colleagues just down the hall from me that said, oh, I had this whole cheating thing. I said, well, here's the link to the report. Oh, what's the use? And when you can't be bothered and blah, and it's like, I can't believe they cheated. And I basically put this test online without making a single change for the change in modality, right? Gave everyone the same version. And now I have a shocked Pikachu face that they cheated and I don't want to do anything about it. So, it's this, the idea that faculty that don't really want to spend their time doing it because of a comfort level or just like an effort level or how much they care about the issue, Rehan, it transcends all units of academic units of the college.
No, I understand that. And my point is, I mean, Paul and Jen and Chris know, I mean, the one thing that gets me going, that pisses me off, where I become extremely unreasonable, is cheating. I mean, I failed a graduate student because I caught her cheating, and she was graduating. It was her last semester. She had to spend tons of money to go to summer school to take the class over. So that, I mean, the fact that it happens, it devalues. So that's why I'm thinking, like, I mean, I don't know. So trying to bring about a change and force people, maybe offer them help. Hey, if you need help, we can provide you help. Get this done. I don't know.
I don't know if this would be helpful for others, but it's been a while since I've been teaching. So what I would like to do at some point is kind of like run through the steps of a scenario. Could we do that?
Okay.
All right. So let's say I have a student who I think is cheating on something small, like a quiz. Maybe they're just, like looking at their neighbor's paper in class, right? So, I, as a instructor, I'm going to grade and I'm like, these people were sitting next to each other and they have exactly the same material, and including a really obvious and kind of unique to one person error, right? Like 1 + 1 is 7. Obviously, this person was a little distracted and somebody copied, and I don't know who is who, but maybe I have suspicions, right? Okay. And so then, I observe this. I have to do what? First, speak with the student. And so I asked the student to come talk to me, and I'm like, what? Can you tell me where this 1 + 1 equals, where the 7 comes from? Right? Something along those lines. Okay. And then they come up with some crap story like, well, my eyes just wander while I'm taking a quiz. And, I can't help which way they look and the things they see. I'm not making this up, right? Just so you know, this is a happened in the past scenario. So then where do I go from there?
Elizabeth, I would just note, I think you chose a very difficult example. The observation of someone's eyes wandering is probably one of the most difficult cases.
Oh, no, I
make a
didn't
systemic-
observe the eyes wandering. The student tells me that the reason why their answers are just like this other person's answers are because their eyes wander.
I mean, it sounds, of course, it would depend on, the actual interaction with the student, but I mean, I would be tempted to use a reflective statement to say it sounds like you're acknowledging that your eyes wandered to someone else's answer and that you see this as a problem for you. When they say yes, you've confirmed an academic integrity violation. I mean, you can still decide how to handle it, but in my experience, having everybody sort of in agreement when you can get it on what's happened and you have evidence for it. If a student says, no, my eyes didn't wander, and you have somebody who's in denial, that makes it, to Liz's point, I mean, it makes it really difficult. But you're presenting evidence.
Okay.
You're saying this is what I'm seeing, and I want you to tell me about it. And then it's going to go probably in one direction or the other.
So
So
at the end of that-
I don't know if this addresses what you're saying. It's not a similar situation, but this is with actually Chegg was involved. And in one of the investigations, the students all had answers that just did not make sense, and they were similar, right? Because Chegg had answered the question incorrectly, or whoever had provided the solution to Chegg had provided the wrong answer, and everyone who had benefited from Chegg had no logical way of arriving at that solution. So I think the eyes wandering first, that admission, and the fact that I know in management we teach 1 + 1 = 3, but we don't teach 7 because we teach synergy. So 1 + 1 = 3 is there. But if there is no logical reason for how they can arrive at a conclusion, there has to be an assumption that there is some collaboration, I'm assuming, in order for somebody to arrive at totally unreasonable response.
So at the end of the meeting with the student, I gathered, the student's perception of what has happened and my own evidence. And at that point, do I tell the students like what I think is appropriate to happen? Or do I just say, okay, well, I'm going to submit this as a violation of some sort, right? Like, how do I end that meeting?
I would mention it to your department chair. I would bring it
Speak
up.
up, Paul.
And your department chair may have advice on how you could do things, but I think at that point, yeah, you're ultimately going to have to tell the student what your decision was. And in those situations when they come to me, if it's appealed by the student, it can be uncomfortable when I have to go to the instructor and say, so what was the evidence that you used to assign this penalty? And if a penalty is assigned, it's incumbent that there is some sort of evidence other than just, I'm sure that they were cheating. This student has always done poorly and then they did well. So they had to have been cheating. And I've gotten that from, instructors occasionally, and unless you have, unless you have the really weird error situation, unless you have these two diagrams are strangely identical situation, unless you have the I saw you looking at the person's paper, then you really can't penalize the student, even though in the fiber of your being, you might know that they cheated because they failed everything and then they did well on this test. And it could be that they actually studied for a change and they did well on the test. So in the absence of some sort of at least semi-objective evidence, you've got to be careful about the penalty. But I think that having the 1 + 1 = 7 on the two papers, that for me is good enough for assigning a penalty.
I agree. If I see a student just looking on somebody else's paper, I will probably just ask them to sit somewhere else, because that is not any. Now, on the other hand, if I see a student, with a big cheat sheet on their desk, that is not. I suppose that is not a hard evidence either, but that would be a different scenario.
Yes, it is hard evidence. It's literally hard copy evidence. So, right. Don't have to prove they used it. It's just there. So, yeah.
So I guess, I mean, it's setting up expectations, because if they're like on my exam, sometimes if they're using scrap paper, I give it to them because I tell them that they can't have anything open. I don't care if the paper that they have has their grocery list on it, that I will find unacceptable. So I guess I set that up as an expectation when we're starting out, so that it's very clear: no phone, no book, no nothing, only what I give them. And I give them exams on the computer also. So we use the monitoring software to make sure. That's how I've caught people cheating, because they had other things, other tabs open. I tell them any other tab open, I will automatically consider that to be cheating regardless. So I guess it's an issue of setting up expectations as you're doing it. I know it becomes kind of cumbersome, but I think if you clear it up, because in the past, I caught somebody and I had to give them a lower penalty than I wanted to, because I caught them cheating on the exam. Other instructors in the School of Business were just giving them a lower grade on the exam. But now I have clearly stated in my syllabus, any cheating on the exam is an automatic E in the class. Somebody asked what software. We use the Phoronix Insight, which is just because we take them to the lab, so it's in person. And when they log on, the computer, and you have a teaching station. The teaching station displays thumbnails of each computer. You can click on it and it opens up. And my suggestion would be, even though this violates accessibility rules, if you're using slides, make them really, really colorful, because that's how I caught somebody, because they had a tab open and there was something really colorful. I'm like, this doesn't look like the exam. This looks like the slides. So, so that is, I mean, the Phoronix Insight works pretty well actually, because we have a teaching station and you can go through and cycle through. Obviously, you still walk around in the, but this happens in person and not obviously for remote proctoring and things like that.
Right. Rayhan was talking about basically an in-person browser lock if you're in a computer lab kind of situation, I think is one issue. I think if you're teaching online, people think proctoring software is their solution to outsource it. And this proctoring software can be super problematic for a number of reasons. I have stories, so many stories. So
the incident that I dealt with the math department,
Move closer, move closer. It gets better when you get closer.
It's fine. It doesn't pick up the first thing that I say. And anyway, so Greg Churchill in math had a student who he suspected was using something illicit on their computer. And the only evidence that he had for it was that there was a light coming from beside him. So he recorded the proctoring software recorded what his computer camera was showing and what was on the student's computer. But if you have another computer or a tablet or something set up beside you, you can be doing other things on that. And so the only evidence that he had was that there was a light that was shining off of the person's glasses or something that suggested that there was another screen. And it's really not good evidence that you can use to penalize a student. It may be that student was using something else. It could be that there was something else completely plausible that was causing that light. So I hazard that online proctoring is, you're going to have to deal with a lot of things that are gray areas. And I think that we're not in a position where we can just penalize students because we think that this is happening.
Yeah, I wanted to get back, Elizabeth brought up wanting to be walked through an issue, and she brought up a difficult one of our people looking at each other's papers. But let me offer one that's more concrete that I've dealt with. So basically I have some language in an online asynchronous class that, first of all, if you're answering a question and you go to another source, unfortunately, they always want to go to Investopedia, which is a terrible source. But what I said, you got to cite, if you're using the work of others, you have to cite it. And, in this particular problem set or homework assignment. So sure enough, I get things copied from other sources and they are not cited. Right. And so that violation, I would not call that a level 3 violation. It's probably a lower, particularly the first time it happens early on in the semester. So, I would essentially, my penalty was going to be zeros for that and a warning that repeat will escalate the penalties and a reporting. So I would email the students and say, there's a problem with assignment 1. And, here's the problem is, this is the question, this is your answer. This is what comes from another source. I'd have the URL and I'd have the text from the other source. Then I would copy the text from my syllabus, the academic integrity part of my syllabus, which explicitly says you cannot do this, that this is a penalty. Then I usually quote the language from our policy that says, now is the time where you have an opportunity to explain your understanding of the policy of what's happened here before we decide a penalty. Right. Then at that point, the student will reply to me. And I guess my typical response is, oh, I didn't realize, I was really stressed. I saved this for the last minute. I didn't mean to do this or things like that and blah, blah, blah. And so most of them are, most of them don't quibble with the 0. I get a lot of, as Magdalena knows, I get a lot of, please don't report this to the dean. All right. I've never done something like this before. So yeah, so usually I respond and I will say, thank you for your explanation. This is my penalty. My penalty, there were 2 questions on the homework. They will both have a score of 0. This will be forwarded to the dean's office along with my decision about the penalty. You've now been put on notice that this is not allowed. And if this happens again during the class, then it escalates potentially to letter grade penalties and things like that. And then usually, and then I fill out my report, and that's typically where it ends for that kind of minor thing. So that would be an example of, I guess, a lower level issue and how it might work its way through the system. That one is an easier one to deal with because they can't say, I actually word for word, made up 300 words that someone else on Investopedia.com also wrote. Isn't that an amazing coincidence? Fortunately, no one ever actually tries that one with me. No one says I'm actually an editor for Investopedia in my spare time or anything like that. So, that's one where they really can't push back and say, you're totally misinterpreting what happened. I totally didn't do that, right? And so I guess that's an example of how a lower level would work its way through where guilt or fault isn't really much of an issue.
And then let's say that like the next thing is this person, you know, has a second violation,
Mhm.
right? Or perhaps a more serious violation.
Mhm.
So what is the process like then?
I can give you another example of that process. So this process I had during the early part of the semester. Paul is familiar with this process. This will be fun. During this process, again, there was an initial violation. This was actually a check question, and I gave a 0 for the question. I didn't have a strong, it was early, it was a few years ago. I didn't have as strong a check language as I do now, but I did. I said, you're getting a 0 on these questions. If this happens again, you know, I will fail you, because this, you actually uploaded, you stole intellectual property, and you passed off someone, you outsourced the work of the class, right? And so that went through academic dishonesty, the old reporting form. Now, he was not happy about the penalty, but he accepted the penalty. So I think it's actually the final exam or the last homework of this class. Same thing. Chegg, the questions show up on Chegg. They were new questions. I had written them for the semester, so I knew they weren't from prior semesters, right? I knew it had to be someone in the class. So I do my Chegg honor code. This email pops up, you know, I don't quite recognize the email. And it turns out, you know, and so I actually kind of search on the IP address, and I figure out that this email belongs to someone who's a friend of this student. They actually went to high school together and things like that. So basically he asked someone else to use their Chegg account to upload this. So I actually kind of present the evidence that you use Chegg again. I gave you a very explicit warning, you're going to get an E in the class. And he pushed back. He said, well, I asked my friend for help, and I didn't know my friend was going to look it up on Chegg because I was having trouble with the homework, right? Because God forbid, don't ask me, because, you know, what would I know about the homework question that I wrote to help you successfully solve it? Yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, and so, you know, and so I actually went through and I said, I was really clear about this, right? You know, you have a responsibility here to make sure the work you turn in is not in fact from this. You clearly gave the question got uploaded. You're responsible for these actions, and I gave him an E in the course, and I submitted the report. And I do believe he probably appealed to Paul. I don't know if that actually came to him, but the grade wasn't changed, it stuck. But
I think, Liz, you make a really good point about them coming and asking for help, because I've said in class that if you do something early, you ask for help, that doesn't reduce your grade. That actually shows you're working hard and putting in an effort, and that is a positive. But many of the people think, oh, can I come and ask that? I don't know where this mentality comes from or where the breakdown is.
Well, I also think too, and if you look at time loads, people who are doing this have waited till the last minute, right? Are approaching a deadline. And so they become kind of desperate, and they're making these decisions. So, you know, I think people who haven't been time managing their deadlines and things like that are much more likely to sort of make these decisions. So they've run out of time to come see me. I mean, I've actually tried to accommodate. I have things due like Monday at 11:59 p.m. in an asynchronous online class almost every semester. And so I actually have an online office hour from 8 to 9 p.m. every Monday during the semester. I made that decision because I thought maybe I will meet them where they are and see how that works. I mean, I might get 2 regular customers, over 40 students in that class that will learn to pop in on Monday night and ask me questions and before they turn something in. So.
You know, I think that brings up a good reason to, you know, check in with students, get their side of the story. And if it's some incident where, you know, the student talks about I didn't have time, you know, some sort of statement of desperation, that's a moment where you can say, now you have 2 problems, you know, you've compounded it. And so, you know, getting the message to students to do something before, like if it passes through their mind to go on Chegg or something like that, there's a step before that can happen, like Rayhan was saying, where it's going to result in a reduced grade. So it's teaching students to, I mean, they'd be better off asking for an extension, turning something in late, pleading their case, you know, some sort of step beforehand. So after a lower level incident, it's an opportunity to prevent it, not only with I will catch you, but also here are alternatives so that you don't find yourself back in this place.
And let me offer, Elizabeth, an example from this past semester that's a happy ending, that was not a report. That so I gave an online exam, and it was timed, but in a window, right? And I have a large question pool, so they draw an exam and no one gets the same exam as the other one. Nonetheless, there can be questions in common. So two young men on the same sports team turn in an answer that's weirdly wrong, right? That's the big red flag when you catch cheating. Like, not only this is wrong in an incredibly weird way, right? And there's these phrases, right? There's clearly been an effort to sort of paraphrase. They're not identical, but the set structure comes together, right? And the phrasing and the use of, and the replacement of words here and there. So it becomes very obvious. So I called them in and I said, this is not, right? This is both wrong in a weird way. You're using phrasing that's not really clear that belongs here, and all of that. So to their credit, they came in with the class recording of an example I did in class that was different from the test question. So it explains why it was wrong, because they said, honestly, I didn't know how to ask this, so I looked at this example that you recorded, and the phrasing comes from my example. Right. And it was weird because my example wasn't the same as the test. So the phrasing didn't apply to the new context. Right. But they thought, well, I'll just answer in this old context in the hope to get some credits, some points on this question that are greater than 0. Right. Because, which is strategic, but it was a reasonable explanation. Do I know whether that's true or whether they worked it out together? I don't know. And I never will. But they offered me a reasonable explanation for why I saw the similarities. And unfortunately, because I record my class, the evidence was there. I could listen to it myself, right? And so, I backed off. I thanked them for taking the time to explain themselves, and I considered the case closed, and it did not go forward. And that's like, I didn't have proof that they didn't, but I had a very reasonable explanation for what I saw.
That's a good example that just shows how much of your own judgment. I mean, you have the context of your course, your syllabus, what happened, your notes,
right? Or the explanation.
Yeah.
I think that report really, that example really shows what I tell other faculty is you have to give students a chance to explain themselves. A few years ago, there was an incident down the hall for me where the faculty said, I know you flunked and I'm not going to change my mind, but I guess you can come talk to me. That's a big no-no in our policy. You have to say, this is what I think happened. This is what concerns me. Now it's your turn to take an opportunity to explain. And so I think that really highlights the importance of that early step in the process.
I think the thing, though, is like when you're meeting with the students, should you inform them like firmly of the consequences, or should you be a little bit more vague in the sense of, well, these may not end up being the consequences, So like,
there's a couple, you can say potential consequences. So the offense you expect, you can say potential consequence are 0 on this assignment or 0 on the specific questions. If it's like Magdalena's example of cheating on a test, it's probably a failing grade in the course. I consider the penalty for cheating on an exam to be a failing grade in the course. So you could articulate that, but I would back up and say, I would encourage you in your syllabus for the graded activities you have, you should articulate, what do I consider cheating? Right? What do I consider dishonesty on what I grade you on, and what kind of penalties? So if they go back to the syllabus knowing they're having this conversation, they already know, that, if I consider them cheating on an exam, the penalty is a failing grade in the course. And this is what I consider cheating on the exam, right? Uploading, conferring with others, right? Using answer sites like Chegg or Course Hero, et cetera. So I'm pretty explicit about what is dishonesty on graded activities and what is not. And what graded activities would you be allowed to sit down and work with each other, and which ones are you not? What graded activities could you search the internet for, another answer or a definition and, quote and cite as needed, and that's okay. And in which activities is it not? So.
But then, if you say that this is the consequence, and then, you report this through the whatever and so forth, and, for like a minor infraction, like level 0 to level 2, let's say like the proposed consequence is a 0 on that particular assignment, right? Mm-hmm. This form goes to the department chair, which I don't think Magdalena specifically would do this. She's my department chair, but whatever. What if she's like, no, I think you should only give a 0 on that part of the problem?
I don't think it goes to me necessarily unless the student appeals.
Well, that's a bit of a change. That's a change in policy. Like in the policy, in theory, it should be going to the chair. And like I said before you assign the penalty, the chair can be a nice reality check of what you're thinking. Because if you're feeling really bad, or you're angry about something that happened, or whatever the combination of feelings, frustration that can happen, like if you had like 10 students cheating in your class, the department chair doesn't do the penalty for you. Before you assign the penalty, though, it may be a way of just checking in and reaching agreement on what seems reasonable. I mean, it
So,
would-
so you personally go to the chair, you don't, the form is not sent automatically to the chair. You go to the chair before you fill out the form?
I think it's a both, Magdalena, because the policy says that in the case of a level 0 to level 2 violation that does not result in an academic penalty of blah, 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 the chair/designee will review and approve the action. Right? So if I have a student cheating on my quiz, we have our conversation. I list some potential consequences to the student in our meeting.
Mhm.
I fill out the form. You would get the form.
I didn't get any forms in the past year.
and I don't
Unless,
think the system was set up to do it, but I think in theory, once something is reported that there's bringing the chair together or a designee with the instructor, does it say, Elizabeth, that the chair approves it?
The specific language, the chair/designee will review and approve the action. I'm not crazy. I'm looking at it. I'll show y'all.
Yeah, I'm looking at that because that doesn't sound like what.
Right? So this is the thing that I'm reading. Right there. Please say I'm sharing the right screen.
so maybe the only violations that were happening were level 3 violations. And that's when it doesn't go to the chair. It goes automatically to academic conduct. So maybe that's why I didn't get any forms for approval.
So, but in like to have a nice procedure, right? So like I see this incident, I speak with the student, gather some evidence, and maybe it needs to be reported. So I conclude the meeting with some potential outcomes. I talk to the chair, make sure I'm being reasonable. Does this really make sense? I fill out the form. The student gets some sort of note saying, this is what happened. And this is
I don't think that there's anything automated in the system that closes the loop with the student. So that's the instructor's prerogative to do that, to say, here's my decision. You fail the class. Good day.
Good day, sir. I said good day. Yeah, and I wish that were different in the system. I actually think students should be CC'd on the report that's sent about them.
So then I submit the form and then I tell the student concretely, this is the penalty that is happening.
Yeah, and if they carp about it at that point, you can say, as with any penalty, you can appeal this, and here's the process.
Okay. Now, what if, this is a pretty big what if, but like, what if in the course of this conversation with Magdalena, we actually disagree about what's reasonable, and I'm very firm. I think, this thing needs to happen. And she's like, no, this other thing needs to happen. Where do I go?
I would think that the associate dean would be the person to talk to at that point. And, as far as I understand anything, the instructor has primacy over assigning grades. Assigning penalties would be included in that. So although the department chair might say, this is outside the norm of our department, so you shouldn't do this, I think that as long as it's justified by what you have in your syllabus, that you have complete authority to make that decision. If any appeal ever gets to me, one of the things that I tell the student is I can't change a grade. So I'm upfront with them with, regardless of how egregious this is, I can't change the grade. I can go to the instructor and say, you've really screwed up on this. But if the instructor ends up saying, no, I didn't, then we're at loggerheads. And I've never had it come to this, but at that point, the student would have to go up to the 7th floor. And Ramin has been very consistent saying that he doesn't change grades. So if it's really your opinion versus the world, your opinion ends up being the opinion that goes. But I don't think that it shouldn't ever come to that. It should be something where either you decide, yeah, I guess this is outside the norms, I'm going to make this adjustment, or that everyone else says, yeah, I think that your evidence actually is strong enough, then, let it be.
And then the other thing is this policy actually says, step 4, for level 0 to level 2 violations that are not elevated, the student will receive written notification detailing the instructor's findings and the assigned academic penalty. So does this mean that I have to write a letter to the student saying, you cheated on this quiz, here's how, blah, 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 and here's the penalty, blah, blah, blah else?
It could be an email.
Yeah.
I use it as an email, right? We discuss, right? And usually when they discuss it, I usually give time to think about it. I don't say right away because I think students, I do want them to feel like I heard and I listened to what they had to say. And then I actually respond. I mean, sometimes in my online class, it all happens on email typically, but an email is fine to say, we had your discussion. I know you said that your friend uploaded to Chegg on your behalf. Nonetheless, you sought help knowing, the issues that were involved. And, the fact is you benefited, you gave my question to someone who then stole the intellectual property, blah, blah, blah. And so I have decided to go forward with the penalty I originally articulated. And then I usually say, at this point, an appeal first goes to the chair and I have the contact information, then to the associate dean and I have the contact information. So I don't think it has to be like a letterhead letter that you want to talk about.
Email is the official communication for the university now. So readmissions, all of this happens through email. So if you send it through your email, obviously don't use your personal email, use your official university email and keep a record of it and you would be okay.
Okay, so then I think that it might be a good thing to bear in mind in like future renditions of this policy to make the roles kind of clearer, because when it says the student will receive written notification, I think, oh, that's going to come from some system. Whereas if it said the instructor should notify the student in writing, which I usually would think of as email anyway, right? Detailing blah, blah, blah. Like that makes it clear that it's my job. I got to finish this,
It's a great point because that passive voice makes it so there isn't necessarily an agent. I wonder if, depending on how things are enacted with the form and how Maxant works, I mean, maybe the communication will end up taking on a different form, but an instructor looking at the policy wouldn't know the obligation. So it's such a great point.
But it also, like, if it is the instructor's obligation, it kind of helps to kind of know what should be in there, especially for very new instructors who maybe this is their first time, like, yes, they should probably talk to someone, but also just like make sure this notification, when it details the instructor's findings, that's good, right? And the assigned academic penalty, that's also good. But, like the additional information about who the student should go to if they have questions, should that be in there? Yes or no? If so, like, maybe it should say so. I wouldn't think to put it in there, although I see now it's a good idea. Anyway, I guess our session's over and all of the leaders have left.
Everybody has disappeared, I guess.
I guess so. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody.
John's here and Jen is here. I don't consider myself a leader. Jen is our leader and Paul is obviously our spiritual leader with his all Jedi presence. So
Thanks, everybody. So we got some good notes that we, the associate deans, will take back and help us fine tune things, policy and procedure. So we do appreciate your time and your thoughtful comments.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.